Hello, everyone. My name is Betty, and I'd like to share a personal story with all of you. My mother-in-law, Madison, was once quite a different individual compared to the rather superficial and self-centered person she presents as today. This transformation, my husband Edward believes, took place later in her life. Growing up, Edward and his mother Madison lived quite humbly. Their circumstances became particularly challenging after the tragic loss of Edward's father when he was only 5 years old. Despite the hardships, Madison to the occasion became the sole provider, ensuring that they led a simple yet stable life. This backdrop makes their story all the more poignant, especially after Edward, through sheer determination and brilliance, earned a full scholarship to medical school and eventually became a respected doctor. Despite his professional success, Edward has always stayed grounded, a trait I admire deeply. However, Madison's lifestyle shifted significantly towards luxury after Edward's career took off. To give you more context about myself, I currently do not hold a job for reasons I will explain in time, but this in no way means I am financially unstable or reliant on others. Unfortunately, my first meeting with Madison started on the wrong foot due to her misinterpretation of my appearance and demeanor. When she first met me, her immediate reaction was less than welcoming. "Edward, is this the girl you've been excited about?" she questioned. "She looks so ordinary and unremarkable. Why choose her? Does she even work?" At that moment, Madison wrongfully pegged me as someone who might be aiming to ensnare her son for financial gain, branding me unfairly as a gold digger. It's a complex dynamic, one that unfolds more each day, and through sharing this story, I hope to bring to light the nuances of our relationships and the misunderstandings that often cloud our judgments. Continuing from the previous event, Madison's unfounded judgments about my character led to a tense argument, despite Edward defending me staunchly. The disagreement became so heated that we decided to leave. On our drive home, Edward offered his apologies for his mother's behavior and admitted she had overstepped her boundaries. He tried to console me, suggesting that his mother had changed and no longer resembled the person she used to be. Although her harsh words stung, Edward urged me not to take them to heart. However, the thought of being around Madison comfortably seemed daunting. After all, she was Edward's only remaining parent. I chose to maintain some distance, understanding that completely cutting ties was not a practical solution given our small family circle. "I'm not expecting you to be friends with her, but could you manage to be civil?" Edward asked. I agreed to be respectful towards his mother, although I was doubtful she would return the favor. "Don't worry, Betty," Edward reassured me. "If she steps out of line again, we'll reassess our interactions with her. I love my mom, but I love you too, and I won't let her mistreat you without cause." Despite Edward's promises to defend me, I remained uneasy about my relationship with Madison. 4 years after we began dating, Edward and I got married in a simple court ceremony, mainly due to our tight budget. Edward was financially supporting Madison by sending her a substantial amount each month for what he termed emergencies, a practice he continued even after our marriage, which put a strain on our finances. I never interfered, believing it was his right to support his mother. However, Madison's behavior grew problematic. She frequently spoke negatively about me to her friends, perpetuating rumors that painted me as a gold digger. At first, I tried to ignore her slander, but it began to tarnish my reputation. Despite Edward's best efforts to mediate, Madison never warmed up to me. She remained convinced that I was not a suitable match for her son, continuing to treat me with disdain and suspicion. This ongoing tension made me question how long we could manage the delicate balance of our family dynamic. One day, out of the blue, Edward shared some surprising news with me. His mother, Madison, wanted to invite me to a small gathering she was planning. Given her evident dislike for me, I was naturally skeptical about her sudden change of heart. Edward reassured me, however, insisting that Madison was eager to make amends and genuinely wanted me to be there. Although her financial situation had been precarious recently, Edward was convinced she had found a way to manage this event. Despite my reservations about her past behavior, I agreed to attend. Edward was hopeful that his mother was making a sincere effort, so I decided to approach the situation with an open mind. I was keen for us to repair our strained relationship and perhaps even build a friendship. Yet, deep down, I harbored serious doubts about Madison's intentions and whether she truly valued her son's happiness. As the party approached, I awaited details from Madison with a mix of eagerness and apprehension. When Madison finally texted me the next day, I assumed she was confirming the invitation. Instead, her message took a completely unexpected turn. She began by casually mentioning the venue, a renowned 5-star hotel that was the talk of the town, and the fabulous time she promised her friends. She excitedly noted that she would be bringing 21 guests. Curious, I inquired if I was indeed invited, based on Edward's assurances. To my shock, Madison's response was both arrogant and dismissive. She clarified that I was not invited, stressing the event's exclusivity, her family's wealth, and the supposed high status of her guests. I was stunned and confused, especially since Edward had been so confident that his mother was extending an olive branch. Feeling humiliated but needing to maintain my composure, I responded to Madison, expressing my misunderstanding calmly. Her reply was patronizing, suggesting that I couldn't possibly grasp the complexities of organizing such a high-caliber event. Faced with this disdain, I chose to preserve my dignity, acknowledging her message without further argument. In the wake of Madison's dismissive message, I clarified that I had no interest in attending a gathering where I was unwelcome. Despite this, Madison doubled down on her exclusivity claims, flaunting her supposed class and status. Though I felt a strong urge to react angrily, I decided against it. Instead of sharing the upsetting exchange with Edward, I chose to keep it to myself and wait for the day of the party to pass. On the day of the event, Madison, apparently oblivious to the emotional toll her words had taken, sent me a photograph of herself and her friends dressed in lavish designer outfits, boasting about their evening on social media. I chose not to engage and instead focused on my work, patiently waiting to see how the situation would unfold. About 2 hours later, I received a call from my father, a call that brought an unexpected twist to the story. Here's something I hadn't shared widely. My father owns the hotel where Madison was hosting her party. This was something Madison did not know. 4 years ago, I inherited a substantial sum from my grandfather, which I invested in my father's business. As a result, I now receive a share of the profits from the hotel and other family-owned enterprises. Despite my comfortable financial background, I've always preferred to keep a low profile, which is why Madison was unaware of my connection to the venue. My father's call brought another surprise. Madison and her friends, unaware of the high costs associated with such a luxurious venue, had racked up a bill of $4,000. After enjoying their evening, they requested a 60% discount, claiming they were short on cash. My father, knowing the situation and seeing how Madison's group had been rude and entitled, upsetting his staff, sought my advice on how to handle the situation. Faced with this ironic scenario, Madison flaunting her supposed superiority at a party she couldn't afford, I shared my frustrations with my dad. We recounted how Madison had used the event to demean me, not knowing that it was my family's property. The irony of her inability to pay the bill did not escape me, serving as a small, albeit unintended form of retribution for her earlier behavior. As my dad and I discussed Madison's ostentatious party and the burdensome behavior her group imposed on the hotel staff, he fully grasped the situation and shared the staff's frustrations. Seeing a chance for a teachable moment wrapped in a bit of poetic justice, I half-jokingly suggested that Madison and her entourage could perhaps make amends by washing dishes and cleaning the kitchen and floors given their disrespectful demeanor. While this idea of revenge seemed fitting to address the way they had treated our staff, it was also a way to make a point about humility and respect. If Madison escalated the situation foolishly, my dad even joked that he could involve the authorities, though we hoped it wouldn't come to that. My dad chuckled at my suggestion, giving it an enthusiastic endorsement, and even proposed to document the event with photos. What seemed like an amusing idea turned into a real scenario. About an hour later, my dad sent me photos of Madison and her friends, somewhat humbled, washing dishes and cleaning the floors at the hotel's restaurant. He relayed that when Madison realized he was the owner, her demeanor shifted to one of relief, as she assumed her acquaintance with the owner would ease her predicament. However, to her astonishment, my dad directed her to help clean as a consequence of her actions. Temporarily dumbfounded, Madison protested, but my dad sternly reminded her that since she did not consider me as family, the familial courtesies she expected were not extended to her either. It was an ironic twist of fate, and although part of me regretted not witnessing the scene in person, the photographs were telling enough. Later that evening, Edward returned home, visibly disturbed. It was apparent that Madison had reached out to him, likely sharing a skewed version of the events. He approached me, concerned, asking about what he had heard regarding his mother being tasked with cleaning duties at the restaurant. At this moment, I had to navigate carefully, balancing between vindication and the preservation of my relationship with Edward, fully aware that the dynamics had shifted unexpectedly due to the day's unusual events. I took the time to explain the situation to Edward, outlining that what occurred at the restaurant was a standard consequence given the circumstances. I detailed how Madison had come to our family-owned restaurant, accumulated a bill of $4,000, claimed she could only pay $2,000, and then harassed our staff. The event she hosted had turned into an utter nightmare, and the actions taken were, I believe, entirely appropriate given her behavior. Edward, visibly surprised by my explanation, inquired about the guests Madison had brought along and what they had ordered. I told him that contrary to what she had told him, Madison didn't bring just 5 people. She had brought 21 guests who indulged heavily in the priciest items on the menu. Edward was stunned. Madison had told him she had invited me as well, but I had declined. I corrected him, showing him the text messages from Madison that clearly showed I was never genuinely invited. At Edward's request, I provided him with the restaurant bills and showed him all the texts exchanged. My father also sent him the receipts to substantiate the costs. To further clarify the extent of the event, I showed Edward some photos of Madison's lavish party. Seeing all the evidence, Edward's disbelief turned into anger. He immediately called Madison to confront her about the discrepancies in her story. Madison tried to downplay the situation, claiming she had only mentioned being short on cash and accused me of twisting the story to sabotage her. Edward countered her, pointing out the discrepancies between her story and the evidence, and reminded her that she had insulted me by saying I wasn't classy enough to attend her event. Madison attempted to pass off her remarks as just a harmless joke, but Edward wasn't convinced. He pressed her on her irresponsible spending, especially since the money was coming out of his pocket, and criticized her for insulting his wife while squandering funds on friends. Madison was left scrambling to justify her actions, but Edward expressed his profound disappointment and disbelief at her behavior, struggling to reconcile her actions with the mother he thought he knew. In a moment of heated conversation, Edward confronted his mother about her ongoing financial requests and her disrespectful behavior towards me. "I made a mistake by always giving you money when you told me you needed it, Mom. Well, guess what? I'm not doing that anymore." "But Edward, you've been so supportive all this time. You can't just stop now," Madison protested, her voice laced with desperation. "It was just a one-time mistake, Edward. Why are you overreacting? she added, trying to minimize her actions. "No, Mom, I'm not overreacting. This isn't just a one-time mistake. If you can't even consider my wife as family, then I don't want anything to do with you," Edward retorted. "I always hoped you would change your attitude, but you never did. I'm not going to pay you to insult my wife and call her classless, especially when she has sacrificed so much to support you. This ends now." Edward didn't wait for her to respond. He hung up on her, blocked her number, and turned to me, his demeanor softening. He apologized profusely for having doubted me initially and for not understanding the full extent of the situation sooner. I forgave him because, in the end, he truly stood up for me. We had a serious discussion about Madison and decided that for now it was best to distance ourselves from her. Edward, though now a wealthy man, remained humble and found his mother's behavior towards me utterly unacceptable. I agreed, feeling relieved and validated by his support. Together, we resolved to remove the negativity she brought into our lives. A few days later, the gravity of her actions began to dawn on Madison. Realizing that her behavior might have irreparably harmed her relationship with her son, she was thrown into a state of panic. However, the decision had been made, and for us, it marked a new beginning, free from the strain and tension her presence had caused. After Edward ceased providing financial support, Madison's lifestyle underwent a drastic change. Accustomed to a high-end life funded largely by Edward's generosity, she suddenly found herself struggling to maintain her standard of living. Despite having a job, her earnings were not sufficient to cover the opulent expenses she had grown used to. As a result, she began showing up at our house, initially making demands to speak with Edward, which soon turned into desperate pleas as she was repeatedly turned away at the door. In the meantime, Edward redirected his financial support towards my father's business, investing in the expansion of his hotel and restaurant ventures within our neighborhood. We have aspirations to grow the business into larger cities, but these plans are still in the early stages of development. The change in financial support meant Madison had to significantly downgrade her lifestyle. She struggled to afford her rented condo and eventually had to terminate her lease, moving into a smaller one-bedroom apartment where budgeting for anything beyond basic necessities became her new reality. She often emailed us about her financial difficulties, still downplaying her previous behavior and suggesting that we were overreacting to the situation. It was clear that she wasn't ready to fully acknowledge her role in the estrangement. As we decided to distance ourselves from Madison for the foreseeable future, life brought us an unexpected joy. I discovered I was pregnant. Edward and I are thrilled and have been busy preparing for our new arrival. With the baby on the way, I'm relieved that our child will be shielded from the negativity that Madison brought into our lives. Nonetheless, should the time come when Madison wishes to be part of our child's life, I am determined to ensure that she does not impart any harmful influences. For now, we are focused on welcoming our child into a loving and stable environment, away from any shallow or disruptive influences. We appreciate any well wishes as we embark on this exciting journey of parenthood, hoping to provide the best for our child.